Welcome to the Life, Money, and Living Well podcast. My name is Ben Beshear. I'm the CEO of a financial services firm. And while finances are important, I know the key to living well is more than just about dollars and cents. So join me in conversations with experts and advocates for authentic and insightful discussions about life, money, and living well.
Emily Chang's resume is the stuff of dreams. It begins here in Cincinnati at Procter & Gamble, where she spent 11 years finishing as Global Associate Marketing Director for Personal Healthcare. Then she worked for Apple, helping to establish the face of the brand in China, where she was promoted to Head of Retail Marketing for Asia. Then she moved to Intercontinental Hotel Group, one of the world's leading hotel companies, where she served as Chief Commercial Officer. Then to Starbucks, where she looked after branded customer experience, first as Chief Marketing Officer of China, before becoming the Senior Vice President of Marketing in Seattle. Right now, she's stationed in Shanghai, China as CEO of McCann World Group, a global advertising agency network with offices in 120 countries. While we could talk for the next hour about her business success and learnings, and we will, it's what she's done with her spare bedroom that sets her light years above her peers. As her career has taken twists and turns, Emily's family has maintained a spare room in each of their homes. These rooms are given to young people facing abuse, neglect, and marginalization. The spare room has become a sanctuary for nearly 20 young people who each in their own way have become part of Emily's family. Her best-selling book, The Spare Room, Define Your Social Legacy to Live a More Intentional Life and Lead with Authentic Purpose, shares the stories of her spare room and how defining your legacy is imperative for everyone from CEOs to stay-at-home dads. I am so excited for this episode. Welcome to the show all the way from China, Emily Chang.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
So let's start off. You've had incredible success all over the business map. As you listen to me read through your resume, which of those business ventures are you most proud of?
I guess the one that comes to mind is IHG. You know, sometimes people get attracted to the big brands. They get excited that I worked at Apple and Starbucks, but for me, it's more about the people you have the opportunity to work with, the ones that you get to support and promote, and then the combination of the business challenge and the business results. So at IHG, it was a huge change management endeavor. We ended up flipping the entire executive leadership team over time. And that's never easy. But what I'm really proud of is we also changed our business results sort of hockey stick style. And today, as I look back, it's now been probably 6-7 years since I've left that job. Most of the leadership team is still there. And I think sometimes we risk thinking that leadership is great when the person is there. And when it falls apart after they leave, we think, oh, see, that was a good leader. But actually, I think true leadership is exhibited when the leadership team maintains and the business results continue to grow after the person leaves, because it means that you've left a really solid foundation.
It's like the opposite of what people think. A great leader is their meaning goes far beyond the time they were there.
It should. Yeah, I think so.
So you talked leadership, and we can go to something I wanted to talk about as it relates to leadership. You've managed large teams all over the world. How would you describe your leadership style?
I would say two things. One is I'm personal and I'm authentic. And I think those are things that not a lot of people with my title always are. I'll say that I wrestle with how I show up now and then. It's not something that's always easy, because being personal, being authentic means that we are more vulnerable as leaders. We share our own insecurities. We share our own moments of doubt in the decisions we've made. We bring people along, but I also think it's who I am. It's how I operate best. And I think that style has drawn people to me, and people have stayed with me in multiple jobs, even as I traverse industries. The second description, I think, would be intentionally engaged. I talk about intentionality a lot. I think that is really important because it's so easy to get carried away by our schedule, to have our EA run every second of our day. But actually, when we choose to be intentionally engaged, we own our schedule. We say, I don't care what my title is or how busy I am. This is my responsibility. I want to build in, for instance, walking around time. When I have different agencies on different floors, if I don't build in that time, I can go a week or even a month and not get to a certain floor and see a certain group of people. And how does that make them feel? So I think there are lots of things we can do as leaders to not only be engaged, but intentionally look at the time that we're spending. How are we allocating our day? How are we positioning ourselves to be in places where we are visible and able to engage with people at different levels all the time?
I feel like sometimes as leaders, we're almost trained to be stoics and trained to not be vulnerable. Why do you think that is?
I don't know if we're trained. Something I've been thinking a lot about is representation. We talk a lot about representation because there have been a lot of incredible Asian actors that have just won a whole lot of awards in Hollywood. And that's wonderful. But representation to me is even broader than that. It's how we show up in the workplace. How are leaders showing up in Hollywood movies? How are the leaders that get the most press representing themselves? And then I think that cycle begets that cycle because it demonstrates this is what the world deems as success. And then others say, wow, if I want to be seen as a success, I must follow that model, whether or not it's authentic to who I am as a person. And I think somehow we all contribute. It's like a crowdsourced cookie mold of some sort. And I think that's why I said earlier, I do want to be authentic. And maybe there isn't as much of a mold for that. But I think it's important because when we are authentic, we are consistently ourselves, which means we are not pouring resource into trying to project an image that is not congruent with where we are. That means we are reserving our energy to put against the things that matter the most.
Right. And you mentioned earlier spending time with your teams. I know you've done a bunch of unconventional things to have fun with your teams. Tell us a little bit about that.
I don't know about unconventional. Oh, yeah, I guess so. So I like to find reasons to celebrate. I think it starts with being intentional, which is, what are the daily interactions? What are the weekly, the monthly, the quarterly, the biannual? I have it all laid out with my EA, who, by the way, has also been with me for 3 jobs and knows me really well. And she knows that this is something that I schedule out at the beginning of the year, because that's how we can make sure that everybody has an at-bat. There's plenty of face time for everybody, and we all have opportunities to engage. Because as a leader, I think our job becomes less and less leading from the front and championing. It becomes curating the environment in which people are able to mingle and have these creative collisions. So speaking of creative collisions, I now run a creative agency, and my only job is making sure I have the best people doing the best work matched to the best accounts. So we want to find ways to celebrate wins. We just had Women's Day. We have General Mills as a client. And so we gave out Haagen-Dazs ice cream, and we drew a little, ice cream note that I hand wrote and signed for each of our women. Or, that's not particularly unconventional. We won the Olympics. And this was the first time the IOC had chosen an advertising agency to do their work because, they're the IOC. They can pick any director to come and partner with them. So it was exciting that they thought we could help them amplify their story. So when we won the Olympics, we also were doing Olympics for a couple of other brands like the North Face, et cetera. And so we decided to host a McCann Olympics within the building. So this is just silly. It's fun. It's frivolity. And sometimes we try to project such a serious nature, going back to your former question. When you break down those walls of trying to look so professional and serious, and you can have fun next to each other, what happens is you begin to see each other as humans, not as creative versus business leader, not as senior versus junior. You're just all ice skating on a lot of salt that we brought into the building to see who can balance on one foot the longest. So if people are willing to come along with me to have fun and be a little bit silly, what I find is it builds really deep relationships. And, this is frankly a really great business strategy because we have seen retention increase by over 10%. We have seen regretted turnover, oh my goodness, reduce over 40%. People want to stay where it's fun because we spend so much time at work. Other than sleep, that's where we spend the most of our time. So we might as well choose to walk into a building every day where our heart lifts up when we walk in versus our heart shrinks and constrains and we feel stress upon our shoulders. So I think it is the leader's job to create that environment.
And have you seen changes in your leadership style since COVID where you have people all over the place, all over the world? Some people are in the office, some people aren't in the office. How has your leadership style changed, and how have you worked on the culture in a really changing environment?
I think if you continue to be intentional, that's the consistent piece. But how that intentional leadership shows up changes. So for instance, we had an extreme lockdown in China. It required extreme leadership because if you know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You start at the base,
Right.
which is basic food, water, and shelter, and you kind of go up to where you're helping people feel a sense of belonging and esprit. Well, we went all the way to the base of the pyramid because suddenly people were locked down in apartments. Some of them don't have kitchens. Some of them don't have food. And there was no way to get food because there were, I think, 17,000 delivery people for a city of 21 million people. So we had to figure out, we put aside everything that was our day business and we had to figure out, how do we get food delivery to our people? How do we deal with young folks who call in tears because they have 1 cup of rice left and they don't know if they should feed it to their pet or eat it themselves? You know, you suddenly realize there's no playbook for so many of these situations. So if you want to be intentional and you want to be authentic, and this is where having a North Star of knowing what kind of leader you are and you want to be, it helps you make choices. It helps you say, yes, I will invest this much money to get food to people. It's not going to keep everyone alive and happy and perhaps, you know, nutritionally balanced, but it's worth it because A, we have to feed them. They're our responsibility. And B, I think from a morale standpoint, they will feel care. So in addition to care packages, we had the opportunity to insert 1 slip of paper. That's what, you know, this delivery vendor was able to do for us. So I printed out a 2-sided, one side was a handwritten note from me and the other side was, do you remember when you were a child and you could fold the paper into an origami and it became one of those like finger fortune tellers?
Right.
We did that for them. And so you could pick a number and then you flipped open the origami and then it would pick a letter and you flip that open and it would give you like a little mental wellness challenge. And some of them were really silly, like, you know, do 10 push-ups, and others were just, let's see how many of these guys engage, open your window and scream out the window. So we're trying to find ways to create this sense of family and togetherness. And we are here together in this. Even when we are physically, you could not be less together. I think that those are the ways that as a leader, we just got creative. We brainstormed. Everybody's idea was a good one. And we figured out how we could create that sort of thread of family, even though we were all online. And a lot of our guys were very much suffering.
And what kind of response did you get from that?
Oh, it was so cute. I've saved all the photos. They started flooding our WeChat group with photos of their cats walking over the food of like, you know, there's literally nothing to do.
Right.
So these guys were making little houses with the food we sent them. They were, and then it kind of, you know, this kind of community inspires more. So the second time we sent food, we decided to make it sort of a guessing game. So I wrote a riddle that said, this snack is going to make you quack for joy. And so they started to flood the WeChat with like, are we eating duck? Is it duck tongue? Are we having this or that? And it was actually Pringles. And then I revealed the answer by putting, you know how you can put 2 Pringles in your mouth and make it look like a duck beak?
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, you're intentionally being silly. You're showing yourself as a leader with Pringles in your mouth like a beak, but it gives people a smile and it helps them feel like, oh, not only are they giving us, you know, the good snacks, but they're engaging us along the way. So it's not like a box just anonymously shows up. We're making it as much of a shared experience as we can.
It doesn't take that much extra to make it feel special, right?
It really doesn't. It really doesn't. And then, you know what togetherness feels like? It's going into your WeChat group and seeing 150 messages constantly of people saying, guessing what the thing is. And when they get it right, they're like, do I get an extra can? It's dialogue and it's community. And that's as much togetherness as you can create when everyone's stuck in their own little box.
Right. If you look at all you've learned in your career, if you could go back to yourself, Emily, starting her career, what would you tell yourself when you were launching your career? What advice would you give yourself?
I think there are probably 2 things that come to mind. One is that there's no one path. I started off in pre-med. That's what I was so convinced I wanted to do. Then I went to get my MBA and I thought finance is probably the right direction because I have a strong base in science and math. And then, you know, I'm running a creative agency. To me, if I visualized a career path, I'd almost look at it as a Jenga tower. If you've ever played Jenga, you know, it's 3 blocks of wood lie in one direction and then the other direction. And what you do is you kind of poke and see where you can push one piece of wood through. And some of them you touch and it absolutely doesn't move, right? You know, it's going to take the tower tumbling down. But other pieces you press and it slides seamlessly through. I think that is how I've thought about my career. I've had amazing opportunities. I talked about IHG before, and that is not an industry or a career that I had ever even considered. But that Jenga piece just came sliding out, and I thought, oh my gosh, what an opportunity to do something really interesting. So I was really excited at that opportunity. It turned out to be a great learning experience. I feel like I contributed. And then from hospitality, I went to Starbucks, and now I'm running a creative agency. So absolutely, there's no one path. And I think if we limit ourselves to thinking, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm going to be, and perhaps pride gets in the way and says, I have said I'm going to do this, so I'm going to do it. But my gosh, how sad would it be if pride trumped joy? So look at all of the different paths that life kind of puts in front of you and think laterally. Well, maybe I'll try this. Maybe it won't be a success, but it's a year or two and I'm certainly going to be learning. So there's no downside. The other thing I think for young Emily Chang is my foot was always pedal to the metal, like to the floor, as you might imagine. I don't think there's anything wrong with keeping your foot on the pedal, but do you know when you drive in times of stress, your foot's kind of clenched? Do you know what I mean? Like your foot is stressed and your foot is on the pedal. So what I would tell a younger myself is keep your foot on the pedal, but take off the pressure. You can still move at pace, but you don't have to exert that extra pressure or stress on yourself along the way.
That's fantastic. As we transition to talking about the spare room, the idea behind the book is fascinating. Give us the 30,000 foot view of the spare room before we jump in.
Well, I started, and then eventually my husband and I as a young couple, and then the three of us with my daughter, have taken care of 17 little boys, girls, vulnerable children in our spare room over the last 23 years. I started off wanting to tell the stories of these incredible kids who have overcome unbelievable odds. But the book has transitioned to become a place where the spare room is a euphemism. I'm not encouraging everybody to open their spare room and bring, children they don't know into their house. What I'd say is everybody has something like a spare room. So what is that unique combination of experiences, capabilities, resources that you have, and where do you want to direct it? When you're able to define those two things, I think you land on what I call your social legacy. Your legacy being how you leave something better than you have found it, and social defining the space in which you want to have that impact.
And in the book, you talk about your social legacy is where your offense and your offer meet. Explain that to us, because I thought that was one of the most fascinating, game-changing parts of the book.
Oh, thank you. It's a little bit of what I just described. So on one side, imagine a Venn diagram. You've got your offer. On the other side, you've got your offense. So offer, I wanted this book to be practical and help people not just close the cover and say, oh, that was good, that was inspiring, but actually walk away with their own social legacy defined, an action plan, and the first step that they're going to take. So that's the objective for everybody who reads the book. On one side, we help define your offer. Again, there are exercises that help you evaluate, what are my resources? What do I uniquely bring to the table? What are my experiences that perhaps I took for granted or didn't even think about? What are my passion areas, my hobbies? On the other side is your offense. And I picked that word intentionally because I think, lots of people can talk about opportunities or areas where we can contribute. But there was an old movie that really impacted me with Will Smith. And it's just this one moment, I think it was called Concussion, where he's sitting on a rock overlooking a river and his wife says, you're upset. I may be misquoting the movie, but it's just the moment that just came to me. And he turns to her with this intense expression and he says, I am not upset. I am offended. I am offended by what I have seen. I think there's something in the world for each of us that offends us. Because from morning to night, we come across 10 things, whether it's social justice related, environment, pollution. It could be anything. There are lots and lots of things that could be better than they are today. But there's going to be, I think, that one thing that offends us, the thing that we really struggle to walk by. We stop and we at least think somebody has to do something about that. And I think, some of the spare room challenge is to say, is that somebody you? If you know your offer and you know your offense, define what is it that you want to do with this one precious life that you have. And regardless of your resources, regardless of your finances, you know, that's why I think the book is interesting, because it covers stories that are not just my own. People all over the world, in all different walks of life, at all different ages and levels of seniority, have lived into extraordinary lives. And there's this amazing Balinese proverb that says 100 years, all new people. When you think of it that way, we only have 100 years max. We're probably not ready to do something of deep meaning in the first 13. We're probably not able to operate at our full faculties in the last 13, right? So that's 26. That gives us 60 or 70 years. So how old are you guys? And where are you in that bell curve of life?
And did you know that children, marginalized children, was your offense, or did you learn that through just putting one foot in front of the other and taking these kids in?
It's one foot in front of the other. I think that's important because it's not like I was born with some deep calling. It's not like I was very intelligent and philanthropic and said, I'm going to do this with my life. It's not. I drove by a girl when I was 20 and she was beaten up, sitting on the side of the curb in upstate New York, and I just couldn't drive by. People were honking behind me and I couldn't leave her sitting there because that was my offense. And then after she left, another kid came by my life, and then one after the other after the other. And one of the questions people often ask is, how do they keep showing up? Like, what kind of program are you involved in? And we're not. We've never even been vetted as a foster family. It's just wherever we've been, New York, Cincinnati, Arkansas, Shanghai, Guangzhou, we have found children who needed help, and they have found us. Literally, one has stumbled into our porch. She fell and, landed in front of our house. Another one was introduced by a woman who walked by my husband every day as they followed similar routes to drop off kids to school. And she just said, hey, there's this kid who needs help. Would you take her in? Because I'm too busy. I mean, they just keep coming. So I think that's something kind of amazing about the energy of this world, which is if we have a sense of who we are, we're like a North Star or a lighthouse of some sort, right? We're a beacon, and that will draw the need if we're willing to let that light shine.
And do you think most of us are just too busy to even notice what we're offended by? Is that the big problem for those listening? Because I think all of us could have seen a child stranded or a human in need, and we just walked by. Are we just too busy? What keeps us from leaning into what you've been leaning into?
I don't know about busy, because I think we're all busy. I think it's about articulation. I personally believe in the power of words. And that's what this book is about, right? I want you to write your offense. There are lines you must fill in. I want you to write your offer. I want you to write your social legacy. I want you to write your action plan. I want you to list names of your tribe who are going to hold you accountable. When you write something, it's like a commitment. It's a contract. Even if you don't show it to anyone else, it's a contract with yourself. And when you write something down, you remember it. I'm sure there's some science behind that I'm not going to try and pretend to know. And so I think if people stop and think about what it is that they're offended about, even if you take 10 minutes with this book as you close a chapter, or you close the book and you walk away, you marinate on it for the next month. But I think once you know what the thing is, then you don't walk by it. It's sort of like, an Aston Martin. Let's talk about this beautiful car. Once I discovered this car and put it in my top 3, I saw it everywhere. Have you ever had that happen? Like you discover, it doesn't have to be an Aston Martin. It could be like the Chevy Equinox. Once you discover a car, you see it everywhere on the road, but you don't see them. You're like shrouded, or your eyes are sort of fuzzy until you see it once, and then you see it everywhere. So once I recognize that there are so many vulnerable children falling through the cracks of a social justice system where they aren't cared for. It is just shocking what is still happening in developed and developing regions. Then you can't unsee it. And once you start seeing it, then you start embracing. And then I think, like I said, there's this sort of magical thing where once you're open to it, it just sort of gravitationally finds you.
And you've been raising a daughter as you've had some of these kids in your home. What has she learned through the experience, or is this just normal to her?
That's a great question, because it is normal to her. It wasn't until I started writing the book that I realized she doesn't really know that not everybody does this. Because she was like, what are you writing about?
Right.
Isn't this just our life? Does anybody want to read this? And at first, to be honest, that's what the publisher said. She said, maybe it shouldn't just be your stories. Maybe it should be a much, broader sample set. And so we widened the aperture. But yeah, I think Lainey has become a very wise girl. She has been exposed to a wide range of life circumstances. And, I remember when she was little, I always said to her, you will be privileged because of your financial status in life, compared to the rest of the world, you're in the top single digit percentages, right? So you are, and, maybe a lot of people listening to your podcast are in that same place. So you are privileged, but I don't want you to be entitled. The thing is, when you tell a child that, they're sort of like, okay, how do I not be entitled? So it made me realize, as a parent, my job is to introduce the circumstances in which she will not become entitled. And one way to do that is to expose her to the world at large so she understands the benefits that she has been born into. So, next week we're going to Guatemala. We're going to go build a school there. We've done a lot of service trips in Asia, but never in South America. Now that we've relocated to the States, that's a really close by location. And we're going to live with a local family. We're learning Spanish on Duolingo. These are things that she is interested to do because she wants to see what's on the other side. That's one of the chapters. It was a young woman named Harper who lived in Minneapolis, blonde hair, blue eyed. And she was running on the track team and was running next to an African man who said, and she was like, God, you are always so fast. And he said, well, that's because I was once chased by a hippo. And it just introduced the whole background of his life. He was one of the lost boys. And she was like, how can this have just happened? And we didn't hear about it in our history books. And so she said, I want to see the other side. So this young woman is extraordinary. She's now not as young of a woman, but still beautiful and a good friend of mine. She intentionally exposed herself to the rest of the world so that she would not ever become entitled and she would understand her privilege and use it to help others. You asked me about women. I think it's not just upon women to recognize and be intentional about challenges as well as advantages. I think it is equally incumbent upon men because we have to help each other if we're going to see all boats rise.
It's one thing to tell our kids not to be entitled, and it's another thing to actually do something about it and give them an experience to make them understand how fortunate they are, right? And you've done that.
I mean, we often say we want to raise great kids. I actually think that's flawed. I don't think our job is to raise great kids. I think our job is to be great parents. I think our job is to be the very best role model we can be, to create the circumstances, to expose them to the world, to broaden their mindset, and then let them be who they are. To take responsibility that I will then look at her and define that is a great kid and therefore that is success feels like a lot of pressure on both of our shoulders. Instead, I'll put it on myself and say, am I exposing her to the world? Am I giving her travel opportunities? That is one of the big reasons we left China after 13 years. There's so much uncertainty about travel in China, with the COVID policies, and certainly they've loosened up since we've left, but there's an uncertainty there. And I thought, she's only got 3 years left with me. These are the 3 years that I get an opportunity to show her as much of the world as I can and have much more of a daily influence in her life. And it is my job as a parent to maximize that time.
Tell us a little bit about some of the children that have lived with you, and tell us some of those stories, because I think those stories are part of what makes the spare room most fascinating.
Well, there have been 17, and I think in the book there have only been 5 that were featured. I'll tell you one in the book and then maybe one not in the book, because then, you're hearing something nobody else knows. The one in the book that has touched us the most deeply, we do these little taxi chats where because I speak a lot for our family, but, my daughter and my husband have a lot of wisdom that I would like them to share. So when we sit in the taxis, I just hold up my phone and ask them a question, and the 3 of us each answer unprompted and unscripted. So in one of our taxi chats, I asked each of them, who was the kid who impacted you the most? And we all said Teo. Teo was the boy who came to our house to die. Lainey was only 4 years old when he first came to our home, and she was 9 when he ended up going to his forever family. So he lived on and off with us for 5 years, a total of 3 years. And this kid who came into our house with a hole drilled into his skull with a house drill, body liquids leaking out the back of his skull, screaming in pain, is now, he just went on a trip with his new family to India to serve the underprivileged. I mean, talk about parents who are taking that responsibility to make sure their children don't feel entitled. That is extraordinary. His family is awesome, and they're just an extended part of our family now. Teo left such an impact on us because we were willing to take in a screaming, tortured boy and let him just have a safe place to die. And then we were just astounded when he didn't. And he just continued to defy every medical prediction. I mean, I remember distinctly at one point we were going to adopt him. And we were sitting in a doctor's office because you have to go through this medical sort of expectation setting. And she was saying, look at his CAT scan. It's empty. He can't understand anything you're saying. He will never be able to speak. He has no pituitary gland. He can't balance. He's never going to be able to stand. And I was just like, I know I'm an optimist, but I'm pretty sure he speaks. Like, I don't think I'm imagining these words. And I think he understands. And she said, oh, honey, you want to believe that. And I remember walking out of there like, not dejected, but so confused. And I'll tell you, today, Teo talks at full speed. He walks, he takes care of himself. He went to India, for goodness sake, to serve children. And I think sometimes when you are willing to extend yourself into what I call a social legacy, you will find, you think you don't have enough time, you're too busy, you don't know where you want to contribute. You will find life amplifies. We have more time, we have more richness, and we have the privilege of experiencing more miracles when we open ourselves up to amazing people like Teo.
That's awesome. And the one not in the book.
Oh, there's so many. Gosh, which one do I pick?
I wasn't going to let you get away with that.
Yeah. I'll tell you probably a more challenging one. I'm going to change his name. His name was Charles is what we'll call him. And he came in through a weird circumstance. We also didn't know him, a young guy who ended up in China, an American, and didn't know what he was doing. Didn't realize you can't just, find a place to stay. So very naive, and came in, saw our apartment. And Ben, our apartment was relatively humble, but certainly we had a housekeeper and it probably looked really nice to him. And his immediate reaction was, how much of your goodness can I consume? It was really interesting. He came in and he was like, I still remember this conversation. Lainey was little and she was kind of kicking me in the back of my leg because he goes, I don't know how to iron. And I said, is that so? I can teach you. He said, yeah, it's really hard to learn, but you iron really well, right? Right. I'm like, oh, do you know me at all? Are we going to go down this road? And then at this point, Lainey's kind of like smirking in the corner, like, uh-oh. And I said, no, I will teach you how to iron. I will bring it out and show you, but I'm not going to do your ironing. And then he was sort of like, do you have a housekeeper? This is great. What can I get her to do for me? I was so offended by his attitude. We're trying to be helpful to a young guy who has found himself in an unfortunate circumstance. And he's immediately like, what can I gobble up?
Right.
But trying to lecture somebody and tell them this is not the best way of engaging with life and the people around you is a pretty useless, it's a futile exercise. So instead, we started to show him how we contribute. We started bringing him places and showing him how China lives. And then he started to see things differently. He stopped thinking, how much of this can I consume? He started to think, oh, I have all this at my availability, at my fingertips. What can I contribute? And he actually left a lot with us for that period of time. It wasn't the easiest living with him. It was sometimes highly amusing. But at the end of it, we ended up with a simple sign that we put up on our wall, which is contribute divided by consume is greater than 1. It was just a really simple lesson that Charles taught us, which maybe we knew or maybe we were living that way. But again, there's power to words. And without intentionally capturing it, we weren't living into that. So our family now says we always want to contribute more than we consume, because that keeps us in a place of not entitlement. It keeps us in a place of gratitude and humility.
And do you feel like Charles got a little bit of that before he left? Did you see him turn in the corner a little bit?
I mean, ever so slightly, but he was also very young. And I have hope that he is a contributory member of society today somewhere.
You might have learned the lesson better than he did as a family, right? But we'll see.
Sure.
Yeah.
We're not sure. You never know. And that's been some of the joy of the spare room. Some people are there for a couple of weeks. Some are there for years. We get the chance to watch life unfold in a very different human body, which is amazing. But also, we just get to be a small part of their life journey, and later you look back at Leah, the little girl I told you about who was beaten up on the side of the street in New York. she did not remember me that well. She was so young. She was 14. Or maybe she has a sort of like a fuzzy memory of that woman who brought me to, or that girl who brought me to her apartment for a couple months before I ended up with a foster family. Or maybe not. You know, Teo does have some neurological setbacks. So one day, will he not remember me? You know, that's a little heartbreaking to think about. Would he look at me and kind of just smile? He stopped calling me mother in Chinese now. He calls me, it's actually really cute. So tell me this kid doesn't have a brain. He's smart. He calls me the equivalent in Chinese of sister grandma. So it's sort of like he knows generationally I fit somewhere within that, but he doesn't know exactly who I am anymore. And you know, I'm going to be okay with that if one day he sees me and doesn't know me anymore, because I had the chance to be a part of his life and see him to where he is now. I think we need to hold things a little lightly. And it's actually a great lesson as a parent, because we only have our kids in our home for 16 or 17 years, and then they're out. What is it? Like 90% of the time a child ever spends with their parents is in those first 16 years. So I'm coming on the end of like 85% already, you know, something like that. And so I can't hold her so tightly. My job is to hold her loosely, be the best role model and the best parent I can be, to enable her to explore the world with a sense of abundance and to live as fully as she can into this one precious life that she's embarking on as I'm closing out a second half.
Yeah, those statistics are sobering. I have a almost 13-year-old, and you think, it feels like the days are so long early on,
Yeah.
but I'm 70% of the way through my lifetime time. If you look at the cumulative amount of time I'll have with them.
That's right.
So
That's right.
unbelievable. So as we wrap up, I'll give you the last word. If I would hope as our listeners are listening that they're thinking about how they push forward their own social legacy, how they try to figure out what their spare room is. You've given us some tips and clues, but what would be the first step from your perspective if somebody wanted to find their spare room and find their social legacy for their future?
At the risk of being commercial, buy the book.
Great answer.
I do think the exercises are designed to be very sort of helpful and intentional and practical, you know, and specific. But I'll also share something personal about the first time you and I met. When I reached out to you, introduced by a mutual friend, Chuck, you asked me what my goals were. And I don't know if you remember this. This was years and years ago. I said, my goal is to be financially at a place at 50 where I don't have to work anymore. And the reason is I want to start giving everything away. And I remember your response was, that's not what we normally hear.
That's right. I'm like, I love that answer and I've never heard it before.
But it's true. I would like to die empty. I think one piece of advice is to think about that 100 years, all new people. Life is so fleeting. And if you're listening to this, you're probably at your halftime or into your second half, right? Break up your years. How many years do you have left as full functioning, fully capable, can do anything that you want to do? You know, an adult. Maybe, I don't know, 30 years, right? Maybe I have 30 years. Maybe not even. So if I have that amount of time, what do I want to accomplish? Is it accumulate more wealth? I'm sorry, because this may be counter to your business success, but maybe not. Maybe it is about living a fuller life. Maybe it is about more hours with my family now. Maybe it is saying, hey, maybe I'll pause and celebrate for a minute. We've gotten this far. We're okay. So now, how do we embrace more contribution? Or how do we fill our lives with more joy? Or how are we becoming more intentional in the way that we live? Maybe you don't want to die empty like me, but maybe you want to die in a certain way. And that's an end goal. Like quite literally, that is the ultimate end goal. So are you working your life toward that end goal?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we say the whole reason to have money is so that your future decisions aren't about money, right? And
Yes.
so I think that's what you're saying is money can't be the end destination. The end destination for you is dying empty. It's having given back. And so That's really cool. It's a great way to end. So where can people learn about the book? Where can they follow you? Where can they keep up with what you're doing?
Sure. Socials for Facebook and Instagram are thespareroom.emilychang. You can find all of that at my website, my weekly blog at social-legacy.com. The book you can find on Amazon, Walmart, all the big channels.
Great. Emily, thank you for being here. You increased your social legacy by helping us increase ours today. So thanks for being here.
Thanks again for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. As always, our goal is to empower life beyond money. Hopefully, today's episode inspired you with some new thoughts and ideas to help you live well. Before we leave you today, here's a brief legal disclaimer about today's episode. This podcast is intended for informational purposes only. The ideas and opinions on this episode do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Listeners should seek the input of their own tax, legal, or financial planning professional before acting on any of the information provided. Any speaker on this podcast series expresses opinions that are subjective at the time of recording and are subject to change without notice, and are not always indicative of the opinions of the underwriters of the show. This episode should not replace the diligence of a full financial plan with a financial planning professional that can take your specific situation into account.